Chapter 12. The Last Refusal. The television had been a gift from Marie, a small flat screen mounted to the wall opposite his bed. Its presence and intrusion he had initially resented, but gradually come to tolerate. She had insisted on it, had argued that he needed something to occupy his mind during the long hours when the pain made reading impossible, and the silence pressed against his eardrums like a physical weight. He had relented, as he had relented about so many things since Marie had entered his life. And now the screen glowed softly in the corner of his room, a window onto a world he had spent his life trying to escape. He was watching the evening news when the story broke, the anchor's face shifting from professional neutrality to something more urgent, more grave. The words came through the speakers, distorted by the cheap electronics, but unmistakable in their meaning. An attack, a clinic, multiple casualties. The footage showed the building, its facade scarred by smoke, the emergency vehicles clustered around its entrance like ants converging on a wounded insect. The reporter spoke of a lone gunman, of a manifesto that had been found, of a philosophy that had been cited as justification. Elias felt the blood drain from his face. He knew, even before the name was spoken, even before the photograph appeared on the screen, even before the reporter confirmed what he already suspected. He knew. Julian, the young man with the burning eyes, the trembling hands, the absolute certainty that Elias had once shared and then abandoned. Julian had taken the philosophy and turned it into something monstrous, something that Elias had never intended, something that would haunt him for the rest of his life. The reporter continued speaking, her voice clinical, detached, the voice of someone who had seen too much violence to be shocked by any particular instance of it. She described the attack in clinical detail, the shots fired, the bodies fallen, the chaos that had erupted in the quiet space where women had come seeking care. She described the manifesto that had been found, the rambling document that had laid out the philosophy in all its terrible clarity, the philosophy that had been inspired by the work of a man named Elias Thorne. The camera cut to a photograph of Julian, the same photograph that had been used in the conference materials, the same intense face that Elias had seen in Chicago. The photograph showed Julian speaking at a podium, his hands raised, his face alight with the fervor of conviction. The caption beneath the photograph read, "Suspect identified as Julian Cross, 23, follower of antinatalist philosophy." Elias could not breathe. The air seemed to have thickened, to have become something solid and obstructive, and he struggled to draw it into his lungs. His hands were trembling, the same trembling that had once been Julian's, the same trembling that came from a certainty that had been shattered and was trying to rebuild itself. He looked at the screen, at Julian's face, at the philosophy that had been twisted into violence, and he felt the weight of everything he had done pressing down on him like a physical force. He had built this. He had written the words. He had made the arguments. He had convinced the world that life was suffering, that procreation was a moral wrong, that the only ethical choice was to refrain from creating new life. And Julian, the true believer, the follower who had taken the philosophy to its logical conclusion, had acted on those beliefs. The violence was his fault. The deaths were his fault. Every life that had been taken, every family that had been shattered, every future that had been destroyed. All of it was his fault. He thought about his sister and the love that had survived everything. He thought about Marie and the kindness that had found him in his darkest hours. He thought about Sophia, the little girl in the hospital bed, the spark in her eyes that had refused to die. He thought about all the lives that had been touched by his philosophy, all the suffering that had been caused by his words, all the damage that could never be undone. He thought about all of it, and he felt the certainty return. Not the certainty of the philosopher, the certainty of the man who had built his life around an idea. A different certainty, a certainty that came from the recognition of his own failure, his own blindness, his own responsibility for the violence that had been done in his name. He reached for the phone on his bedside table, his fingers fumbling with the buttons. his vision blurred by the tears that had begun to fall. He dialed his sister's number, and she answered on the first ring. "Elias," she said, and her voice was strained. Urgent. The voice of someone who had already heard the news and was trying to find the words to comfort him. "Elias, are you okay?" "Have you seen the news?" "I've seen it," he said, and his voice was hoarse, cracked. The voice of a man who had been hollowed out by grief. "Clara, I need to do something. I need to say something. I need to make it right." There was a pause on the other end of the line, and he could hear her breathing, the soft sound of her breath moving in and out of her lungs. When she spoke, her voice was gentle, careful, the voice of someone who was trying to protect him from himself. "Elias, you're dying. You're in a hospital bed. There's nothing you can do." "The police will handle it. The media will handle it. You don't have to take responsibility for what that young man did." He shook his head, even though she could not see him. "I do have to take responsibility. I built the philosophy. I wrote the words. I gave him the arguments. He acted on my beliefs, my words, my philosophy. And if I don't say something, if I don't condemn what he did, then I'm complicit. I'm complicit in everything. I'm complicit in the violence." She was silent for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was quieter, softer, the voice of someone who had accepted the truth, even when she did not want to accept it. "What are you going to do?" she asked. He closed his eyes. The answer came to him slowly, the words forming in his mind with a clarity that had been absent for so long. He knew what he had to do. He had known it from the moment he had seen Julian's face on the screen. "I'm going to record a message," he said. "I'm going to put it online. I'm going to tell the world that I was wrong. I'm going to tell the world that the philosophy was a mistake, that what Julian did was unforgivable. And I'm going to ask for forgiveness. I'm going to ask for forgiveness from everyone I've hurt, everyone I've failed, everyone whose life has been touched by my words." Another pause. He could hear her breathing. He could hear the faint sounds of her household in the background, the same sounds he had heard when she had called him from Chicago, the sounds of a life being lived, a life that had meaning, a life that was worth living. "Okay," she said. "Okay, Elias. I'll help you. I'll help you do it." Marie arrived an hour later, her face flushed from the cold, her eyes full of the concern she was too professional to express. She had seen the news, of course. She had seen everything, but she did not ask questions. She did not offer opinions. She simply set up the camera, adjusted the lighting, positioned the phone where it would capture his face in the best possible angle. He sat in his bed, propped up by pillows, his body weak, but his mind clear. He had spent the last hour composing the words in his head, the words that would undo the work of a lifetime, the words that would condemn the philosophy he had built, that would ask for forgiveness he did not deserve. Marie looked at him, and her eyes were kind. "Are you ready?" she asked. He nodded. He was ready. She pressed the record button. The camera was a small, unblinking eye, and he spoke into it with the same intensity he had once brought to his lectures, the same conviction he had once brought to his arguments. But the words were different now. The words were not about philosophy. The words were not about logic. The words were about something else entirely. "My name is Elias Thorne," he said. "I am a philosopher. I have spent my entire life building arguments against the creation of life. I have spent my entire life arguing that the world is suffering, that procreation is a moral wrong, that the only ethical choice is to refrain from bringing new beings into existence. I have spent my entire life building walls. I have spent my entire life hiding behind them." He paused, the silence filling the room like water filling a vessel. He looked at the camera, and he spoke with a clarity that had been absent for so long. "I was wrong," he said. "I was wrong about everything. I was wrong about the asymmetry of pain. I was wrong about the non-consensual gamble. I was wrong about the certainty of suffering. I was wrong about joy. I was wrong about love. I was wrong about life. He paused again. The words were pouring out of him now. A confession that had been building for decades. I built my philosophy because I was afraid. I was afraid of loss. I was afraid of pain. I was afraid of the vulnerability that comes with loving anything that can be taken away. And so I told myself that love was an illusion. I told myself that attachment was a trap. I told myself that the only honest response was to turn away. But the truth is that I was a coward. I was so afraid of losing that I refused to have anything to lose. And in refusing, I lost everything anyway. He thought about his grandmother and the way she had held him after the sparrow died. The way her hands had been soft and warm against his back. The way she had let him cry without telling him to stop. He thought about his sister and the love that had survived everything. The love that had found him in the darkness and refused to let go. He thought about Marie and the kindness that had been his salvation. He thought about Sophia, the little girl with the spark in her eyes. The little girl who had taught him that hope was not an illusion, but a choice. I have spent my life arguing that the world is suffering, he said, and I was right. The world is suffering. There is pain. There is loss. There is death. There is suffering everywhere, and it is real, and it is terrible, and it cannot be denied. But I was wrong to think that suffering was the only truth. I was wrong to think that suffering was the whole story. I was wrong to think that the only way to end suffering was to end life. He leaned forward, his eyes fixed on the camera, his voice steady despite the trembling that ran through his body. Life is suffering, he said, but life is also joy. Life is also love. Life is also beauty. Life is also the chance to create meaning in the face of meaninglessness. Life is also the chance to hold someone's hand and tell them that they are not alone. Life is also the chance to be held, to be loved, to be forgiven. Life is also the chance to try, to fail, to try again. Life is also the chance to live. He paused, the tears beginning to fall now, hot and slow, coursing down his cheeks like a river that had been dammed for decades. Julian Cross was a follower of my philosophy, he said. He acted on my beliefs. He committed violence in my name. And I am responsible. I am responsible for the words I wrote, for the arguments I made, for the philosophy that inspired him. And I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. For the lives that have been lost, for the families that have been shattered, for the suffering that has been caused. I'm sorry for all of it. He looked at the camera, and his eyes were full of the grief that had finally broken through the walls he had built. To anyone who has been hurt by my words, he said, I'm sorry. To anyone who has been influenced by my philosophy, I'm sorry. To anyone who has turned away from love because I told them it was an illusion, I'm sorry. To anyone who has chosen not to have children because I told them it was a moral wrong, I'm sorry. To anyone who has been harmed by the violence committed in my name, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. And I ask for your forgiveness. I do not deserve it. I know I do not deserve it, but I ask for it anyway. Marie stopped the recording. The silence that followed was profound, the kind of silence that seemed to have its own texture and weight. She looked at him, her eyes wet with tears, and she crossed the room to sit beside him on the bed. She took his hand, and he let her hold it. That was brave, she said. That was the bravest thing I've ever seen anyone do. He shook his head, the tears still falling, the grief still pouring out of him like blood from an open wound. It wasn't brave, he said. It was the least I could do. It was the only thing I could do. I spent my entire life building walls, and now I'm trying to tear them down. But it's too late. It's too late for all of it. She squeezed his hand, her fingers warm against his cold, trembling flesh. It's not too late, she said. It's never too late. You're dying, Elias. But you're not dead yet. You still have time. You still have time to make things right. He looked at her, at the kindness in her eyes, at the strength that radiated from her like light. He thought about the words he had spoken, the confession he had made, the philosophy he had finally renounced. He thought about the violence that had been done in his name, the lives that had been lost, the suffering that had been caused. He thought about all of it, and he felt the weight of his responsibility pressing down on him. But he also felt something else, something that might have been relief, something that might have been release. He had spoken the words. He had made the confession. He had asked for forgiveness. And whatever happened next, whatever judgment the world passed on him, he had done what he could. He had done the only thing that mattered.